How you doing, guys? Eric from RuleTheWasteland.com. I will give everybody a few minutes to trickle in since this is an not the normal day that I did the live stream on. I had I was playing poker trying to get some win some promotions on Super Bowl Sunday, and then I totally forgot that I had an appointment tomorrow, or yes, rather yesterday. I was gonna do it yesterday, so now we're doing it today. So hopefully decent number of you guys can still make it. Lots going on. And so we're gonna do it tonight. What is today? Tuesday? I don't even know what day. That's part of the problem is that I never know what day it is. So I get lost in thing. I also had to empty a storage unit because that's one of the things I do is sell junk to make a few bucks here and there. And one of the cool things, speaking of which, I will be giving away. I won't do the drawing this time. What's up, Mr. Landfill? I won't do the drawing this time, but for this month, I will be giving away another one of the fire blankets, which are a great prep to have because they're shelves completely shelf stable. You can carry it on your person if you needed and to put out fires. And then the coolest thing I found in that storage unit, he had some gun related stuff, so I got really hopeful that I would get a firearm, but I didn't. But I did get 2,000 rounds of 22 long rifle, which is pretty solid. Um, Even that's expensive. And then I picked up a cigar box that as soon as I picked it up, I could just tell there were chunks of metal in it, and I was like so excited because it was heavy. I was like, the universe wouldn't allow this to be gold or silver, would it? And it wasn't, but it was still pretty cool. It was giant copper bars. And I've told people a long time not to buy the copper, um, there's many pounds here actually. Told people not to buy copper like rounds because they're typically $5 to $7, which is the price for an entire pound of copper. So I've got some several pounds of copper bars here. And I'm curious as to, I'm assuming that these are troy ounces, but I'll have to weigh it. I haven't weighed it yet because typically when you have bars and bullion, you are using troy ounces, which is 14.5 ounces per pound, per avoirdupois pound. But copper is not typically considered a precious metal. So I don't know if this is standard ounces. It being listed at 3.9 is fine and all that. I'm thinking that like this might be troy ounces, but I'll have to throw it on the. But in that batch of copper were these three little copper guns. They're about 5, 5, 5, and 6 ounces each. So I'll be giving away. So at least we got the 5 ounce one at the next live stream of this month. I'll give away the 5 ounce copper. It's got a little tarnish on it, and and then I'll probably give these other little ones away next month. So stay tuned. But that was a cool thing to find because copper is definitely a fantastic thing to store, any real commodity, but it's very difficult to find just lumps of copper like this for sale at anything near what copper is actually should be worth. So if you come across some um pipes or even some wiring or something and you have space to store it, it's not a bad idea. But even at inflated prices, copper is really not that expensive. $5, $7 a pound or whatever. I don't remember what it's at exactly. So to store any significant amount of money, you have to buy so much of it that it's still probably better to go with other things. But it's pretty cool to have diversification into the copper bars. Not that bad. Quantum Getaways is joining you from Myrtle Beach. Coco, usually awesome. Glad to see you. Can make it live. It's a weird day or time. So next live stream this month, because I've been kind of behind schedule, haven't set up everything. I'll giving away copper and fire blanket. Let's go through the comments really quick. Smaller is better. The green oxidated copper is so pretty. Yeah, it does have a unique look to it, that's for sure. Bullion just featured copper in sale ad. Copper is great. Like I said, you just to store even a couple $100, that's quite a bit of weight of copper that you'll be hauling around. So it's not the most practical. And especially to buy it in any of these forms with the rounds and everything, it's not worth it in that sense if you're doing it strictly for metal value because you're just paying such a premium for the form. Um, So I have one or two, I think, of the Silver Bullet, Silver Shield, and maybe one of when Jack Spirko did some of his survival podcast rounds. I might have one of those in copper. I don't remember, but I have some of the silver ones. But just for fun, it's not. It would think copper price would have to get crazy inflated just for you to realize the melt value being equal to what you paid for those. Um, yeah, it's just not that practical. Same with aluminum or any of these other metals. Unless you have a lot of space and can just store like giant chunks of it, in a empty lot or something. It's just not worth enough to store any significant amount of. Now, if you need it for something, if you need wiring or whatever, and you're worried it might not be available in the future, then store the specific things that you need makes a lot more sense. But for to do it the same purpose as like a currency risk hedging, it's just not practical to store significant quantities of it for most people. It's much better and easier to put that into silver because this right here is worth more than that entire tub of massive pounds of bars of copper that I just showed you. So pretty wild, or please pretty close. I didn't weigh that exactly. I think it's got to be like 10 pounds. But still, 10 pounds of copper is only like 50, $60, right? What is copper melt value? Yeah, $5 or $6 a pound, depending on its purity. So you're not going to get a lot from that. 10.2, 14.2 is very common. Yeah, it's just like I said, it's great if you need it in the form that you need it, like to already have the pipes, to already have the wires, to already have any of that stuff. That could be great if you have something specific. But right, to buy the ingots or the rounds, you're generally going to be paying so far over melt value that it's just not even worth bothering. But so lots going on. We'll stick with the metals for now because so much craziness has happened in the metals prices in the past. Now, if you were in a coma, all you did was wake up and see that silver had another solid up month in January, 10 or 15%, I think. And you're like, wow, that's another solid up month. We're at $80 now. But you missed a pretty wild way to get there, which is it went from, around, what was it? Thanksgiving, we were hovering around $50. And I remember saying at a live stream at the time, talking about whether people should buy silver then, that there's going to be giant swings. And I specifically referenced thinking that it would probably go up to like 90 and then back down to 60. So you would still be ahead or paying more than the 50 if you waited for the swing. And that principle certainly applied because it didn't go up to 90 and then back down. It went up to 120 before we got almost that big. I almost nailed the amount of the downturn though, interestingly enough. I was kind of expecting that there would be huge, like at least one huge beatdown at some point because that's just so common when markets spike like that, especially when there's any amount of fervor or certainly minor amounts of manipulation. I don't necessarily think that the markets are as completely rigged as people think, because if they were, they could just keep the prices low and it would never happen to begin with. I think they do minor short manipulations, but when you have the whole global economy and all these countries like China and India also involved, it's hard to just easily manipulate the price. But we got that huge crush of about $30. I think it was closer to $40. It peaked almost at 120. I think it actually traded around 120, but didn't actually close that way before getting all the way back down into the 70s over the course of a few days, and now back up to where we are at the low 80s again, I think, right now. And that feels like, oh no, we're only at 80 because 82. But and gold's still over 5,000. Look at where we were just like 3 months ago, let alone a year ago or whatever. It's insane. And I don't think it's going to stop. Clive Thompson had an interesting video recently about the COMEX inventories um, being dwindled rapidly, where huge percentages, close to 100%, I think in February, of the contracts for calling for physical delivery not rolling over. So that even from this point, even if we just see the same amount of contracts opting for physical delivery as we had last year for these months, they're going to run out by the middle of the year July, August, September. And if we see anywhere close what we've seen for the last couple months, then they could run out in the next month or two. March, April, somewhere around that time frame. And honestly, I mean, if you think about it, other people are seeing this too. People who have their contracts and maybe worried about being able to get the physical and see and try to front run. And that's how these sorts of things start is with panics like that. And it could get really weird. And this whole part of this whole increase in the silver price is they're breaking between the physical and the paper markets. So that's literally exactly what we're seeing at the COMEX with these very unusual numbers, percentage of people calling for physical delivery. Because most of the time, this has always been just an instrument for financial exchange, financial shifting around. Like I said, the entire economy is based on this point system that is pretty much just designed to obfuscate what's really going on, to create more of an abstraction between real world wealth and the financial system to where they can play a bunch of games, rack up the points, and then basically export those points to the rest of the world that we've been playing for suckers for decades, basically ever since the petrodollar type system was invented, where all we've been doing is exporting dollars and inflation and importing real stuff like oil, manufacturing, labor, exporting pollution, basically. Any of these manufacturing processes, one of the reasons they can do it so much cheaper in China and Southeast Asia and South America is because they're not doing it as safely and as cleanly as we would have to and certainly prefer to do it if we were to do it in our country with all the safety regulations and EPA regulations, environmental stuff. Like they don't have all that in these factories in China and India. And that's why it's so smog ridden and you have such a high injury rate and everything with these factory. All these crazy videos you see online of factory injuries are always in Asia, in India. They're not in the US. I mean, occasionally you'll get one in the US that'll make its way into a OSHA training video, but we're exporting that risk. We're exporting the pollution. We're exporting the inflation. We're exporting everything that is bad and negative and importing real goods, the stuff that they make, the physical um, raw materials, all this. That's the stuff that we're all ending up with. The problem is that we have squandered that. Like you could have built up such an unstoppable. I don't want to say empire because it's a loaded term, and I don't think we should be doing, empire in the classical sense, but we could make such a civilization here that we could have, but we haven't. All we've been doing is squandering that, and now we still have crumbling infrastructure and just bloated, diseased bureaucratic systems that are hemorrhaging all this money. And for generations, we've had a system where we've been just the ability to completely exploitatively, of course, but completely benefit from it, and we aren't even using it for anything other than to enrich a small faction of our country. And I'm not saying that as like, oh, that billionaires, because there's nothing specifically bad or negative about having X number of dollars. The problem is this like oligarchical system that, like I said, is just done for naked aggrandizement and enrichment of the in group without thinking of the country specifically. Like even Trump and others have said back in the when we were talking about, oh, we did this for the oil. It would have been better if we just actually nakedly did it for the oil. But instead, we lose tons of lives and trillions of dollars in these quagmires, and then continue to send them um, more money in foreign aid and then take in a bunch of refugees and immigrants who don't share the same values, don't share the same culture, don't share the same language, all these problems. So instead of benefiting from this completely one-sided um, setup, we've just sort of used it to, like I said, enrich, I don't know, the military industrial complex and a few other entities. B. Willen says, "What happened to the regular Sunday night live stream?" That's still probably going to be my night going forward. I may move it to Monday, but just this week I just couldn't do it. But I wanted to do one this week, so nothing yet has specifically happened. What is your opinion on goldbacks as train spotter? I feel about goldbacks the way I feel about the copper rounds is that it's an unnecessary additional cost to an abstraction level of trading in gold and silver metals that are just unnecessary. Like I don't see what they really um offer that gold and silver don't already. You know what I mean? Like it makes it quite a bit more expensive for the amount of gold. And you could say it's arguably a little bit more easy to recognize for the average person, but they would have to become really widespread before people would just accept it in the way that you do like this fiat. They're going to see a gold back, and are you going to know if it's a real one or not, or that it really has the gold in it? It's not any easier to do it with the gold backs than it is to do it with a pre-64 dime or a silver round or a gold jewelry or anything else. So I don't see it just makes gold more expensive without really improving on any of the difficulties that come from using gold as a barter system to begin with. So, cool idea. I'm glad that people are working on that stuff, and there's certainly nothing wrong with them, but I don't see it as being that beneficial. And for the amount that you can get, the amount of gold that you can get for X dollars, it's just not even close. You know what I mean? And I still don't buy that we're ever going. I mean, there's only one or two ways about it, right? You either are going to end up with some sort of monetary metal standard for the currency after the dollar collapses, or you're not. If we do, the gold backs will be um, unnecessary, redundant, whatever. And if we don't, then you're still going to have some kind of currency that the broader country is using. It's probably going to be some sort of CBDC. It'll probably be commodities back and just not specifically or solely gold and silver. I've said for a long time I think gold and silver might be included in it, in what they back the new currency with, but I think that they will make it a lot more complicated purposefully than just making it gold and silver because that allows them a lot more slop and leeway. And one of the things that I've consistently disagreed with the like Phil Lowe and Rocky Farber types about how they see this process taking over is just for that reason that they kind of have this and this is something that smart people struggle with a lot is that they kind of look out and see other people messing things up and just kind of their mental script doesn't really accept or process that people aren't messing things up for the same reasons that they would mess things up. So they think that because they make mistakes because they have incomplete information or something like that, that that's why other people are making mistakes. And if they just had the full information or more information or the right information, then they would do the right thing and do the smart thing or whatever. And that's just completely not true. Most people are completely retarded. They're not smart at all. And even the people who are reasonably intelligent and sometimes even very intelligent, a lot of them are still make the wrong decisions the same reasons that very dumb people do, is that they just are used to doing what their brain tells them to do. So they're just creatures of impulse. It's not because they're just actually too stupid. It's that it would be better to say that they're delusional or crazy in some way or just acting on impulse. They're not really making conscious decisions, and their brain, even their intelligent brains, are just rationalizing their decisions ex post facto and not actually reaching them after logical analysis. So when they look out and see, ask a question like, how would anyone accept a government currency after the government has debased and collapsed its currency? So that can't happen. Is just, have you seen people? You go outside right now and ask people, try to find 1 in 1,000 people that truly understand how our currency system works, how that relates to gold and silver in the past versus how it relates now versus in the future and what's going on with it and what happened in Weimar Germany and how they got out of it versus how they got there. And so no one even knows what's happening to begin with. So when everything collapses, there'll be stuff all over the news about why, just the same way you see all the opinions about why certain conflicts happen, why any sort of economic downturn happens. People will just parrot whatever's on the news. They'll see that that the money isn't working, and that it's becoming completely debased, like Weimar Germany style. And then the government will come out and say, because they already don't know why, so they don't know what it would take to fix it. So if they don't know why it's failing, you could come out with a new thing and it has the same issues or some of the same issues, and no one's even going to know anyway. So obviously, gold and silver will benefit in these scenarios because there's enough people that do know. That's why it will break to begin with. There's enough other countries that won't be willing to put up with it. But just like in Weimar Germany, when the way that they fixed the Weimar Germany crazy hyperinflation was that they just basically went cold turkey and said we're not using the old dollar anymore. We're using this new one that is a fixed amount, or at least a very restricted um, amount, but I think it was actually a fixed amount total. Like it wasn't inflationary at all, or very barely inflationary. So they could allay that fear. Like people kind of, even the stupid ones and the delusional ones will kind of understand at that point when you're in the midst of hyperinflation that we can't just have something that is completely, even though they'll make excuses for it now, you know what I mean, about why it somehow doesn't matter. But in this crazy hyperinflationary environment, they kind of realize that we can't just have these things doubling in amount every, year or whatever. So they come out and they at least assuage that particular fear, and they based it on ownership of the country itself. They said these new German marks or whatever they called them, I forget what they called them at the time, like Lebensmarks or something, um, represented a physical ownership of the country itself, the real estate. It was like a share of the land, but it wasn't redeemable in any way. So they could do that with gold and people being, and just because things were so bad, and now you have this thing, because people aren't gonna, there's no method for people to use gold and silver directly, and there won't be in the future. Modern society has gone too far past that unless everything collapses completely, which I don't think it will, and I hope it doesn't, we're not going to get to the point. We just realistically can't get to the point where you're actually walking around trading in physical gold and silver. First of all, there's 350 million people in this country alone, 8 billion people in the planet. Like, there's not enough, and there's not enough speed of transportation and everything, and basically just liquidity in a form for that to really function. So they'll have to make some sort of currency. And of course, like I said, Phil Lowe and Rafi Farber would say that that's why that has to be gold back, but it doesn't because, like I said, they've gotten out of this mess before by just obfuscating it because there aren't enough people that really know what the real problem is. That don't even know why the current currency is failing. So they'll come out and they'll just see, okay, now this one will work. This is what I'll be getting. All the government people will be getting paid in. This is what I'm now mandated to pay my taxes in. It'll be a hell of a lot more stable than the one that they just debased, and it'll have some promise of backed by actual commodity and being way less inflationary and whatever. So they'll definitely have to improve upon it. They won't just be able to say, here's Federal Reserve notes, those are dead. Here's Federal Reserve note number two. You're going to start using that one because people will have to have some kind of explanation as to why. But the explanation doesn't have to be all that good. As we've seen in the past, especially when things are that bad, people will be clamoring for an escape. So if something that all the experts are saying, look at what people did when all the experts are talking about with the COVID vaccine. All the information was out and available to everyone about that, why that was stupid idea to get the vaccine, and probably wasn't at the very least was probably not going to be very effective given what we've seen from those companies, from that technology, and then all of a sudden just bam, trust us. Um, and people still went along with that because there was chaos and uncertainty and fear and everything else. And that's exactly what's going to happen. So they will have to have some level of assurances, and that's why they'll base it on commodities, but they'll make it a little more complicated. It won't just be a dollar equals X amount of gold or X amount of silver. It'll be here's a share of the resources and the oil and the land. And theoretically, through this process, if you have X number of dollars, you can trade them in for and it'll just be like the COMEX and other things where theoretically you own it, but and so it'll be better in that sense, but I don't think it'll necessarily have to be a physical gold and silver system. And um, it just doesn't, and it'll probably be digital to begin with, which I don't like. And that brings me to one of my other concepts. Was it the Reichsmark was the one that they made? But yeah, they got out of it just by saying this one is not inflationary. It's represented by a real thing. And because people were just like, okay, they needed it something else, they could see that this is now not doubling every day. So it doesn't matter that that's bogus, that you can't actually cash in for your share of the soil of Germany with your number of marks. It was enough to get things moving again. And they'll do some version of that. Now it'll be a little more messy, I think, because there won't be it'll be the entire world financial system having this issues at the same time because the dollar is the world's financial system. And that's an interesting thing that I keep seeing some people like Martin Armstrong, who, like I've said many times, I think directionally has been very correct on a lot of the stuff, specifically with geopolitics. But he is very big on the claim that there is no dollar collapse, that the BRICS is nothing, that kind of thing. And I've been very adamant myself that because I think people are looking at it the wrong way. Like here's his latest tweet. He says, "To all the dollar collapse gang, the United States remains the last functioning safe haven for global capital because every alternative is worse." Now, first, everyone uses the whole cleanest shirt in the dirty laundry kind of thing. I tend to agree more with market sniper Francis Hunt, who says that the dollar is not the cleanest, it's the dirtiest shirt. If you look at like what makes, talking about jet to DDP ratio, the outlook going forward, it's one of the dirtier shirts, not the cleanest in the laundry. And the reason that people are sticking with it is maybe just because the problems with the other ones are more imminent, more acute, and just knowing that the infrastructure and the power and the hegemony of the United States in general. But it's certainly not the currency system itself that should be inspiring confidence in anyone. And but regardless, let's assume that it is currently the least of the bad options. Is that my assessment is that it doesn't matter when something breaks. Like you could have it currently be the best option, and but this idea that there has to be a better option for people to leave something when if we're talking about it breaking, not just people deciding as of right now, which they're already doing to some extent, they're seeing the writing on the wall, and we're seeing a steady amount of trade, especially unilateral trade between one and country at a time, using their own currencies. That's the whole idea about the BRIC. People think that the BRICS is about like all of a sudden coming out taking over and no one using the dollar anymore. No, it's about setting up an alternative so that that option is there when the dollar becomes unviable or when countries just get basically kicked out of the dollar system when you do something that America doesn't like what happened with Russia and what we certainly have done with a bunch of other countries. And if usually we just invade them, like Libya and Iraq and any other country that tries, Venezuela, any of these countries that don't have the central banking system just get invaded, or if they're big enough to where that's not feasible, like Russia and Iran, so far they just get sanctioned and bombarded and everything. So other countries starting to realize like I don't necessarily want to be America's bitch all the time. I want to have another option, kind of like the old kind of apocryphal story about the philosopher Diogenes. I forget who the other one was, but Diogenes was like a hobo who would live in the street and eat rice and beans all the time. And the other guy who's like advisor to the king said, Diogenes, if you were subservient to the king, you wouldn't have to eat lentils all day if you could just learn to be subservient. And he said, if you could learn to live on lentils every day, you wouldn't have to be subservient to the king. And I think that's what's happening here is they're not saying that they're building a system that's better than the dollar system has been for the last 50 years. They're saying, this sucks. I'd rather go live on the lentils. And it's going to be worse, probably. Not necessarily though, but especially when the dollar breaks. Now we're talking about not just deciding to go live on lentils, but we're saying the palace may collapse, taking the king along with it, and now you have to live on lentils, and they're just setting that up to be ready. And so, like I said in my response to him, with all the alternative, will all the alternatives still be worse when there's $100 trillion in U.S. federal debt and we have 4 or 5 trillion a year in interest payments? You know what I mean? Like, we're talking about when this breaks people have to do something else. Like I've used the example before of a bridge and like over a gorge to like a remote village and then like a goat path through the mountains. I'm not saying that the goat path is ever going to be better than a working bridge. What I'm saying is, and while the bridge is working, of course, everyone's going to still use it, even if it starts getting creaky. They might set fewer amounts of people at a time and all that stuff, but they're still going to use it. But when it collapses, it doesn't matter how much better it was than the goat path. Everyone's still going to have to use the goat path. And they're just saying, maybe we should make this goat path a little wider. And that's what we're seeing right now. They're flattening out the goat path, maybe making another one, maybe patching up potholes in that part of it just so they can put a little bit of their stuff on it and in the future have it ready to go when the bridge collapses. Because that's what I'm anticipating is that this bridge that is the dollar system that everyone's been using is being absolutely debased. Like I said, we're rolling over like $9 trillion in US debt. They're already seeing bond yields spike all over the world. What universe are people living in that this is just going to continue forever and it's not going to matter? So the question is not when does this break or like if it breaks, it's when does it break? Now, I am perfectly willing to accept if you saying because of X, Y, and Z, this system is going to break in 50 years. I'm saying, okay, that's an argument to make. Let's see it. Let's try to do the math, whatever, or 30 years or 20 years. That's perfectly understandable that that's possible to me. What's not possible to me is that it's going to be, well, I don't think 50 years is possible. I think 25 is possible that it could last another 25 years um, somehow. I don't see it happening. I don't think we're going to last another 10 years. And I really don't feel like my heart thinks that we're not going to last another two or three before things get really gnarly. But I'm willing to, my brain says, there's a lot of ways that this could probably go on for 5 or 10 years before it gets really gnarly, depending on what happens in the world. But I think we should be prepared mentally and physically for it to be within the next couple years because that we're really seeing things accelerate. And when things accelerate, just like we saw with the price of silver, big moves happen quickly, and our economy and financial system and political system is not in a position where it's strong enough to handle these type of like the stock market's not going to take a 30% swing like silver took a 30% swing. And the bond markets, they're going to have to go to yield curve control very quickly. The entire system is the debt money system. It is the treasury system, which is the bond market. So they absolutely have to do yield curve control when that starts to get out of hand. And I think that's going to happen pretty soon. And at any point, we could have an AI, the AI bubble bursting and the stock money fleeing into other things other than the debt money system. But yeah, like there's just no way that the US economy can handle a 30% downswing in the market or something like that without a lot of these problems happening. And just like every other time in the past, just like Weimar Germany, just like every other situation, and especially because the whole world system is based on this, they're going to save, or not save, they're going to choose to attempt to save the yield curve at the expense of the currency and thus the wider economy, the markets, and everything else. Because you can't do both. So, and since the alternative is a complete seizing up of the system with a huge deflationary depression where money literally disappears from the system, um, they're going to go the way of printing because it's the only real option they have that even gives them any sort of flexibility. And then I don't think we'll get through a true Weimar like situation where things are doubling in price every week or whatever. I think once it gets to that point, they'll pretty quickly switch to a new sort of currency because as soon as it starts to break down, it's going to get really weird and gnarly really fast. And our system isn't really even set up to be able to handle that. Like our current economy and system and constitution isn't, and I mean that like your personal constitution, not the United States Constitution, but like the metal of people in the country aren't going to be able to handle that. People, you have a couple welfare payments that don't make it through, and it'll be a bad day in Bosnia and a lot of these inner cities. So they're going to pretty quickly switch to a new form. And I think we're seeing that preparations being made for that with the CBD or with the Stable Coin Act, um, with all these rumors. It's still potential. I mean, we have people within the Trump inner circle administration, whatever, claiming that there will be a gold revaluation this year. Um, Around July. So I think we should try to stock up on because regardless of whether that happens or not, gold and silver are the place to be for the next. I've said and even before before when I said that we'd probably go from 90 back down to 60 before going up again, I said that we would look at $50 or and lower silver like we look at boomers and the housing prices they had um 40, 50 years ago. And that's true 6 months a year later already almost and looking at like nostalgically back at 25 and $50 so 25, 30, 40, $50 silver. It's already doubled. So, and I think it's going to get worse. And this is happening before we even truly see people fleeing the debt market, before we actually are seeing the dollar break yet. We're just seeing some percentage of people worldwide waking up to this. Um, see what some comments we got are. Bamsi says, would to get enough cash from the ho what? Would to get enough cash from the host to get a small farm? You're gonna have to rewrite that. The Reichsmark was based on production, land holdings, and physical labor hours. There's balance between the three and non-inflationary by design. Right. But there was no way to like it was only just based on that. It's basically lip service. They were saying this is how we value it, but there was no way to really cash it in on anything for the common person anyway. There may have been some theoretical pathway in the same way that like Comex has physical delivery that no one really uses, and then now they're starting to use it and it's breaking the system. Fantana Renhya says the common man loves copper and it's just biological. Copper thieves will risk their lives for like $100 a copper. It feels like a lot of wealth because it's heavy. Yeah, it's very interesting. I always wonder about, and this goes back to, like I said, people just not being intelligent to begin with, first of all, and people sticking with what they understand, is that the amount of like work and risk people will subject themselves to for a certain amount of wealth when they're in illegal activities. They value the item itself. Like when gas got really expensive a while back, people were like stealing the gas, which is dumb because even at like $10 a gallon, you have to get 10 gallons of gas, which is hard for most people to even carry to get $100. And so you're saying I'm subjecting myself to all this work and risk of like siphoning or punching a hole in someone's gas tank and collecting it in a bucket or whatever, and all this crazy shit because they're saying gas has doubled, it's expensive now, I need to steal gas. When if you're going to just say, okay, I'm poor because gas is expensive and I'm willing to steal, you could walk into a Walmart, grab a PlayStation and walk out and they probably won't even stop you, and that's worth $500. You know what I mean? HCP says, look who decided to show up. Hey man, we're just out here rocking in the free world. I don't know if you saw the beginning, but I got a storage unit and I felt some metal bars in one of the boxes. And unfortunately it wasn't silver or gold, but I did get a bunch of these chunky copper bars. So we got a 39 ounce, a 38 ounce, so almost 80 ounces there. A 13 ounce, so 93 ounces. A 13 ounce, so 106, 13 ounce, so 119, and then a big boy 82. What was I at? 119? So you said roughly 200. And like I said, I don't know if these are troy ounces. Traditional copper would not be in troy ounces, but these are made up like bullion bars with the point 0.9, and I haven't weighed one yet. And then I got a couple little ones that I'll be giving away the next few live streams. Copper, these are 6 and 4 ounces. They're pretty cool. So I got golds, and I got this guy here. Oh, oh, I just like to rub it on me. Get that anti microbial properties. So if you ever see me rubbing silver bars on my genitals, it's for sanitation reasons. So just, mind your business. Gas up to 350 here in February. Yeah, it's going to continue to get worse. And one of the things and energy prices, all of it. Um, I would if silver continues to go up, at some point I'm going to cash out like 40 or 50K and get solar. Um, and if it goes to a lot up, I'll get a sheep farm somewhere. I was talking with HTP on Twitter, and I really want to get like 10% of my net worth invested in a black soldier fly farm and sheep farm. But it's not a good spot out here. I need to get a somewhere that's not in the desert if I'm going to have sheeps and grubs and everything. And as much as I love Vegas for living, it's probably not the best spot for a homestead of some kind, um, by any means. Although it's reason, I mean, you can get cheap land out here, but obviously it's a little rough in terms of the conditions. What else we got? I'm gonna move all my metals. The metals man now. I got copper. I think, do I have any platinum? I think I got a little platinum, but this is pretty cool. cool thing to have in a storage unit. And the guy also had 2,000 rounds of 22 long rifle in there, and some white zombie posters, which I would rather keep, but I think it's worth about $100, so I'm gonna have to sell it. As an electrician, I've seen some people do crazy stuff stealing copper. Yeah, and like I was saying, it's weird how people will value, like if you're willing to go through that much illegal activity to steal something, why are you stealing copper? You know what I mean? Like you said, it takes a lot of copper to even make $100. You have to saw through a live electrical cables and stuff sometimes. Like just if you just walked into a store, grabbed some fucking router bits off the wall and Lowe's, each one of those is worth like 60, $70. They fit in your pocket. Take them to a pawn shop or something. Jeez. I guess we're glad that they're stupid, but it's very destructive to people have this copper thievery. It's just an heinous problem in like South Africa, and it's becoming a major problem here. Um, Correlates highly with diversity. Um, it's just a mess, just a mess. And that is another one of the problems that we're going to be seeing going forward is this. And I've said people, I have people like friends I know who have like basically didn't really get it or understand when I talked about how many different nations there were in the US and how much of a problem this was going to be. And it's totally happening. And you see, like with all this discourse about the Super Bowl, like it's really not about uh it doesn't even matter, let's say, because obviously this is a factor. But whether or not it's like purposely subversive on the part of the NFL or whatever, if it's done for political reasons, anything, what we're seeing is a cause and effect of there being so many different nations within one country. And as I've explained before, when you talk, there's so many elements at play when it comes to a culture. And historically speaking, it's much more common to have a nation, a country, and a culture or ethnicity all be generally the same thing, overlapping, very little difference between the two. If you were a citizen of a country, you would usually be very similar culturally, ethnically, and everything else to the other citizens of that country. But now these things have become completely divorced. And in and of itself, these things are not necessarily evil, wrong, or whatever. There's nothing inherently wrong with having someone be a citizen of the United States and not be of the same ethnicity or not the exact same culture or whatever. But it's just like anything else, there's cause and effect, and especially at thresholds. That's the biggest thing that we're seeing here. And so when you see, like I said, the discourse surrounding the Super Bowl, a lot of people being like, oh, I didn't even understand it. And then they're being like, well, it's not for you. And be like, well, that is a problem, right? When you say we have hundreds of millions of people here and we're going to do something for half of them and we don't care if the other half gets pissed off and people trying to say that that's beautiful or good and other people trying to say it's bad and evil, it just is, when you have all these people who have entirely different value systems, different cultures, in this case different language, um, they're going to want different things. And you can't, as I've said so many times, you can never compromise. And I'm not saying this like you shouldn't, like it's not even possible to compromise on issues of direction. You can only compromise on issues of degree. If you say, I want to run 5 miles, my jogging partner wants to run 7 miles, you can compromise and run six. That is what a compromise is. But if you say, I want to go north and you want to go south, going west isn't a compromise or going east isn't a compromise. That's just neither party getting what they want. And so that's what we see now when you have cultures that are and values and everything that are close enough to where you're only quibbling over these minor issues, then you can do things like reaching across the aisle. You can have bipartisan solutions. You can have compromises. But when you say, I want to speak, I think we should be all be speaking Spanish. I think we should all be speaking English. What's the compromise with that? What's the compromise when some people think you should be able to shit in public and other people think that you shouldn't? What's the compromise when you think that you should have to um, show an ID to vote and be a citizen of the country, and some people don't. Like, there's no way to compromise on issues of direction or values. You know what I mean? You can only compromise on issues of degree. And now we've gotten a situation where there's a lot of people who are just strictly speaking identity complicated, which is true of most Americans because there is a lot of um, immigration to America over the year, but it's very disingenuous and just brain dead to act like other white European immigrants 100 years ago is the same as tens of millions of subcontinental people coming over with completely different languages, completely different ideas about how, you know, humans and society should interact and everything. And you don't even have to think that one is right or wrong to realize that this is transformative. It works exactly the same the other way too. It's just a question of threshold and numbers. It's so bizarre to see the same type of people who, like that undiscovered tribe or whatever, that like shoots arrows at airplanes and stuff like that. Nobody thinks a bunch of white people should move in there and give them free health care. Like, no, just leave them alone. This is the way they want to live. Why do they get that right and no one else on the planet does? You know what I mean? Why? Like, I absolutely think that they should be able to live the way they want, if you know what I mean. And no one thinks, everyone thinks it would be horrible. They talk about gentrification. If white people or, European cultures even move into a single neighborhood and transform it, raise the property values, the prices, whatever, make it so that you can't cook food in the street or whatever, that's viewed as being a negative. But when it happens to the entire country the other way, that's viewed as something that just needs to happen and is good because immigration is universally good, even though it's not when it's the other way around. But that's whatever. It's just there's no coherent ideology there. But the idea is that this is transformative. And there's now too many competing nations, and there are too large of a size that I don't think that there is a real political solution that involves things going back to the way they were in the, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So I'm hoping that we can avoid the actual violent solution. And that's what I think a lot of people don't understand is that when you get to this point of national conflict within a country, different nations competing in the same, state and legal entity of the state, um, what's happening now with like ICE and everything, like it or not, that is not the extreme solution. The extreme solution is what comes after if this doesn't work and people keep butting heads, which is actual conflict. So I think that we'll probably end up with some sort of fracturing in the country because, like I said, all these different nations are now too large to where it's impossible for really any one to just take over, um, unless the others are literally taken over, which, like I said, is the violent solution. But it's going to be weird. So hopefully we can reach a non-violent solution. But for that to happen, people have to at least realize and accept that and be willing to say, this is the way I want to live and prefer to live and are willing to protect that. Because there's just literally nothing that exists that doesn't maintain or continue to exist if it's not actively maintained and actively protected. And that's kind of one of these mental scripts that a lot of people that I would say are on the left, even if they're, regardless of whether they're Democrat, Republican, anyone who's like spiritually leftist, one of the core kind of mental scripts that they're operating off of is that the natural state of the world and existence is good, things being abundant, people being healthy, high standard of living, all that stuff. And the only reason that that may not be happening is because it's being mismanaged. So if we can just manage it properly, all these things would be, everyone can be above average if we make good centrally planned decisions, which is obviously completely inverted of reality. It's the exact opposite, that the natural state is decay and breakdown, and anything beyond that, being naked, anything beyond being naked in the woods and hungry and cold or whatever, dying of some random ailment, is something that is above average situation that we have to create and then protect. And if we want that to continue to exist, anything that you want to continue to exist, you have to be willing to make it a hill to die on. When it comes down to it, you don't have to start out with a fight to the death. But just like I've said, there are no laws where the penalty isn't the death penalty. You say no, if they say you're parking on the wrong spot here, and you say no, then they say, well, okay, well now you got a ticket, and you say no, and be like, okay, well now you're going to jail, and you say no, and they say, all right, we're right, and then you continue to fight. The eventual penalty is the death penalty, and it kind of has to be that way for you too. Anything that is not a hill to die, that you don't make a hill to die on, will eventually be conquered. And when that is stuff as important as our complete way of life, we're not even maintaining our life expectancy in this country because people aren't willing to fight for what they view as they think it's mean or whatever to say that the way that you want to live, that your culture, your language, your ideas, your values, to say that that's more important than someone else is mean or colonial or something like that. And it really doesn't matter how you describe it or how you phrase it. If anything that's not defended will eventually cease to exist. It's just game theory. It's just reality. Um, that is the dominant strategy, basically, is to take over. And when other people do it and you don't, when other people are willing to fight for and defend their values and their way of life and you don't, yours disappears. Period. And if you're okay with yours disappearing, then so be it. I have nothing else to say to you, I guess. But it is going to disappear. And for those of us who don't want it to disappear, that has to be defended at some point. Like it says in Matrix, sooner or later, somebody's going to have to fight them. And that fighting doesn't have to be physically fighting. We may be at that point now where that's all that's left, but it didn't have to be that way. But people um, were more worried about being thought of as mean. This pathological, suicidal sympathy. People call it suicidal empathy, but I don't think that's correct because empathy is truly understanding the other person's point of view. And if you do that, because I am like pathologically empathy. I feel bad for the bruised fruit in the supermarket. I'm like, oh man, no one's gonna buy that one. But when it's just sympathy, it's because they don't understand they don't understand these other people don't feel the same way about them and are just trying to make a bet. These people hate you a lot of times, and they don't understand when that's the case and when it's not because they're not truly empathetic. They're just sympathetic. They just feel bad. They get something to tug on their heartstrings, and then they take the resources away from their own family and their own nation, their own group, whatever that is, whether it's their family, their kith, their kin, and then their country, and so on. Um, and they and resource allocation is a zero-sum game. And you see these crazy fucking women most of the time risking their lives, giving away resources for people outside of their own family at the expense of their own family and their own nation, and it's just madness. And it's rooted in, like I said, pathological sympathy. It's not really empathy because they don't understand that these people would fucking eat you most of the time and probably are laughing at you. And regardless of if that's true or not, even the ones that are just really trying to make a better life, because that's absolutely true. And if I grew up in Mexico, I would try to get into the US too. Of course, why wouldn't you? But like I said, resource allocation is a zero-sum game, and after certain thresholds, at some point you have to defend. If you just give away all your money, there's something like wrong with giving and helping out like bums or poor people or whatever. But if you go give away all your money and then you can't feed your own children, that's not being righteous. That's being retarded. Let's see where we're at before I get off on too big of a tangent. My LCS is $10 premium on silver, but was selling 1/10 gold eagles for 460. That's not actually bad, not bad, right? Gold's over $5,000 an ounce. You could lap up those 1/10 gold eagles. So you could get an ounce of gold for 4,600 bucks. Psh, let's get it. Because I really think like there is a solid chance. I don't think it's a majority chance, but just with what I'm seeing everywhere, and with Judy Shelton saying making the claim that we are going to go to a gold revaluation in July. Um, and just obviously the debasement of the currency, gold's going to continue up regardless. But specifically the claim that we're going to go to a gold revaluation. If that happens, gold overnight, whether or not if they mark to market, but specifically if they revalue, it's just printing anyway. Like I've said before, it's just a mechanism for printing. It's obfuscating it, and no one understands it. Um, it's bullshit. But it would make gold go to 10, 15, $20,000 overnight. Like it might instantly go to 10,000 and then within a couple of years it'll be 20, 25,000. So I really would love to pile up. I was going to say I'm going to get as much as possible, but I don't know. I don't have any money. I'm not able to buy anymore. But if I won the lottery, I would put 90% of it in gold and stuff right off the bat. Um, speaking of Twitter, there was Robert Kiyosaki who has been just fucking engagement farming. I think he's kind of a fraud. he says a lot of decent stuff, but he's also just a fucking liar, I think, or a just goes with the flow because he had said months ago that he had like sold off all his silver for Bitcoin. And now ever since silver's been on this meteoric rise, he's been all talking about how like silver and how great it is. And he said something recently that was like, where is it at? I can't find his. Yeah. So he said, I just purchased another 600 US Eagles. Today's spot price is $82 an ounce. Still believe silver will reach $200 an ounce or more in 2026, which is entirely, excuse me, entirely possible, by the way. He said the US dollar is in trouble. True. Savers of fiat currency, fake dollars are the biggest losers. True. Like that's all true. I had his flip flops. But also consider, he said he bought a 600, so it's basically a little more in a monster box. And I was like, oh, wow, a whole monster box, huh? I was like, you humble us with your conviction, sir. Eye rolls. I was like, looking up on the internet or the robot says that Kayosaki's net worth is around $100 million. So a monster box for 600 ounces is roughly 0.00051 of his net worth. And I was like, on the other side of the coin, I am like not counting home equity, which doesn't matter because I'm not going to sell my house. Not counting home equity, I'm like 95, 99% in physical precious metals. So yeah, I don't care what he says. But I think he's right. I think it's entirely possible. I think my official prediction, and I'm going to make my official prediction video not as a live stream within before the end of the month, even though it's February now. I'll probably do it for like the next 2 years, not just for a year. But I think it's very possible that we'll see like a bifurcation. Like I think we're definitely going to get over 100 by the end of the year, and that's nothing to sneeze at. It doesn't seem like much of a call because we were already way past 100. But I mean, we took a hell of a beating, and it would that's still a 20% increase from here, basically 25% almost from here. So that's nothing to sneeze at to get back up to 100. But there are a lot of things that could happen, so I think we'll either kind of be at 100 or some things that could happen to push it into 2, 3, 4, 500. Like if we do see a revaluation, if we really do see the COMEX fail to deliver over the next few months, like all these things could make it like double overnight, instantly, maybe even triple. Um, Same with gold. So I think we'd see somewhere in the 10, 15% increase over the 20% maybe over the year, unless we see these revaluations, then it'll go crazy. So I'm going to do my best to try and stack as much as I can, specifically gold at this point, um, because I love silver. But I think there's a much higher chance of gold being at least somewhat involved in a monetary system reset somewhere on the globe. And obviously that will carry silver up with it. And silver is being just used up completely fast for industrial processes, so it's not going anywhere. We're still super long silver. Um, but I definitely want to get more gold because if they do revalue, it'll go to $15,000 within a few months for sure, I think. So I definitely want to have some of that. All right, guys, we've done an hour. So what topics or questions do you want to have for the very end of our live stream here? As an electrician, I've seen some people do crazy stuff stealing copper. Scrapyard got a picture of the Darwin Awards of the people doing weird stuff. Yeah, gas is getting a little more expensive here. Let me see if I have on my list here. Oh, one of the big things that I'll talk about in my prediction video too that I'm worried about for this year is that the speed at which the AI, not necessarily the capabilities as like in terms of general artificial intelligence or Skynet, even though I'm sure that's in the cards somewhere. That hasn't, as far as I know, hasn't broken out of like just the basic LLM model and the way they work into true AGI. Um, but the image and video generation, like boomers were cooked months ago. They couldn't tell the difference. Now we're seeing a bunch of Gen X and older millennials that fall for stuff that I'm still like, dude, that's definitely got to be AI. In another, but this, I mean, it's crazy. In another 6 months, let alone a year or two, indistinguishable. We're all cooked. And people are already have enough trouble just being bombarded with information and sharing it really quick and not knowing what's going on. What I'm more worried about, though, is how that is going to get so bad so quick, where just everything is fake, that that they're going to use that as a very, very easy and it'll be well received push for all sorts of draconian controls specifically related to identification and non-anonymity online, making you have to do all these. But the CIA won't have any restrictions on fake accounts that they're able to make, you know what I mean, and foreign Chinese governments and stuff. So it'll just be us that has to be a non-anonymous, and then that makes it all the more easy for them to completely excommunicate and unbank people. Like with, imagine if you didn't have any online anonymity with like COVID. If you just, it's basically a social credit score. If you have your one digital ID that is just you, and everything you do online, they know exactly who it is, then they can just shut you out from everything in a blink of an eye, which is terribly scary to me. But people are going to, there's going to be so much weird fake stuff online that people are going to be afraid, and that's always how this stuff comes in. Is they're going to be like, we need to make sure that it's real people, and there'll be no anonymity, and they'll be easy to shut you out because you won't be able to like get banned and then just make another account on anything. They'll just be able to shut you out. And so that's scary. That's what I'm worried about with the AI stuff. And but specifically, especially for someone like, it doesn't even take having an online presence. I mean, if you have a few seconds maybe, but certainly a few minutes of video you anywhere, images of you on Facebook, it's possible for the AI to make almost real-time video of you where you can like be talking directly to the person and it'll look like someone else. So I've already come up with like a code for my loved ones, which I'll share with the rest of you guys if you're watching soon. But so that if I contact you, there's like a challenging password and a response that you would have to get to know that it's actually me because it might look and sound exactly like me. It won't be as funny as I am. The AI is not that good yet. But in some situation, if I'm like, hey, I'm in a Mexican prison, like that, shit, that might be me. You went down to a Mexican strip club and got wrapped up somehow. Like, maybe that guy could conceivably be me. If it says I killed myself, definitely not me. Arrested in a Mexican strip club, killdozer rampage. That might have been me. So now I have these and I recommend everyone do that too, to have some kind of challenging password that you do not share it via any electronic means. Don't tell it to someone over the phone. Don't text it to them. Don't email it to them. Just talk about it in person. And so it doesn't exist anywhere. And then that way, if someone says, "Hey, I need you to send me money because I got kidnapped or whatever," then you can say, you know, just like in Hot Shots where he was like, "Do you know any good white basketball players?" And he's like, "There are no good white basketball players." Something like that that you can say that you will be able to know it's them even if it looks and sounds exactly like them. What are your thoughts on a civil war? I kind of going back to what I just said, 10 or 15 minutes ago. The problem that we have here is not like we had back when we had our civil war, where there's an issue between two, a civil war is a war between brothers, right? The problem is that the people in the United States are not brothers anymore. It's many different nations. So there is not going to be a civil war in that sense. There will be conflict between nations in this country. And it'll be more like Balkanization or some sort of Yugoslavian conflict, like we saw back then, where it's just a lot of different entities. Like we see the conflicts that we're seeing in the United States now mostly are, but like we see fights between Israeli and Palestinian people in the U.S. fighting with each other over something that's happening thousands of miles away on the other side of the world. Or, like I said, Spanish people arguing with white people about what should be on the Super Bowl halftime show. Or white people fighting with each other about whether Somalians should be deported, in Minnesota or whatever. So it's all these different nations. There is no two sides. So there is not an issue that is going to be fought over, and there's not two sides that could just fight over multiple issues. There's multiple sides and multiple issues. So I think it's going to come down to, like I said, like a balkanization, and it'll probably be along state lines, maybe even with some cities breaking out or whatever. I hope that we can get past it. I mean, we are so close to the edge in terms of just not being able to come back from with political solutions. But I think that if we actually cleaned up the voting now and made it impossible to do fraud, I don't know if that's possible, but if we did fix voting fraud completely, eliminate anyone who's not a citizen being able to vote, eliminate the mail-in ballots, all that stuff, it's possible that we could come back from it and maintain the country. But that is mandatory. That has to be done. If that's not done, it's over. And then we'll have some sort of breakup around. It's interesting to note that Vox Day was calling, based on the demographic shifts, was calling for the breakup of the United States around 2033 in around 2002. That was like 30 years, and it looks like he's right on track. Canadian Prepper said that he doesn't think there's going to be a next presidential election. It's not that soon. It's not going to be that soon. We'll have a next presidential election. Like I said, Trump is not the extreme position at all. As much as they call people Nazis and everything, just enforcing the existing laws, sometimes too aggressively, because you guys know I have no love for cops and Fourth Amendment violations whatsoever. But heavy-handedly enforcing existing laws that the vast majority of the country want enforced is not the extreme position. The extreme position is like a Bronx Tale, where they go lock the door and they say, "Now you can't leave." So we have yet to get to the "now you can't leave." But that's what I'm saying. Like, is that what you idiots want? Is that what you stupid soccer moms that are abandoning your own kids to go fight for foreign invaders? Is that what you really want? Because that's next on the list. It's not this kumbaya. You get to the point where you've either killed or subsumed all the people who are okay with what you're doing, and then you just get to the now you can't leave. We got to the point where they said, "Hey, all we're trying to do is have a beer," and you say, "Spoken like a true gentleman, have a beer," and then they continue to trash the place. And he says, locks the door and says, "Now you can't leave." That's the extreme position, and that's what we're on track for. And I'm not even saying that this is what should happen. Like I said, it's cause and effect. It is what is going to happen if we push it to. There's only two outcomes. You either completely take over, or some percentage of the people say, "Now you can't leave," and we're willing to fight to the death over this issue. And that's always what's happened throughout history. But my guess is that that percentage of the population is small enough that it won't happen until we're a little farther gone. And that's why I don't think the country will be maintained in its current form. I think there'll be some kind of fracturing. But hopefully, if we can fix the voting, which doesn't look like it's going to happen, like they're trying, we can't even get all the so-called conservatives and Republicans on board with this. That means our chances are not good. Um, so yeah, I think we'll get through another election. Things will get extra gnarly, especially if liberals take over again, and then we'll get to the now you can't leave physical conflict portion if that happens. But yeah, that's what I think about potential civil war. Like I said, it's good to consider that the Civil War was between almost identical groups that disagreed on one or two major issues. You know what I mean? These were not separate nations. These, like I said, is a war between brothers. We don't have that anymore. There's a bunch of groups in the U.S. that are not even second cousins. You know what I mean? They're complete strangers culturally, um, and that just causes conflict, regardless of which side you would prefer to live with or agree with. Diversity plus proximity equals conflict. That is just human nature. It's always going to be that way. And it doesn't make you a good person to dump a bunch of fish together and be like, we should all be able to live together. And when they're all going to fight and eat each other. That's not you being a better person than the person who says, don't do that, they're going to fight. And it's being like, why do you think they should fight? And it's like, I don't think that they should. It would be better if no one fought, but they're going to. Even if only one of them has to be willing to fight. That's the whole game theory element to it. When you have hawks and doves. Um, so yeah, it's just cause and effect and people being stupid. I think that's going to do it for me, guys. Like I said, sign up to the Patreon and I'll be giving away probably the next, and I'm still planning on doing Sunday, right? What's going on next Sunday? I think we're clear. So I'll plan on next Sunday at 6 and we'll give away a nice and burnished, tarnished. It's got a patina on there. What is this one? The 5 ounce copper and this. So appreciate you guys watching. Stay safe. Continue to stack your beans, your bullets, your band-aids, your antibiotics. Link will be in the description to all that. Your mirror gas masks, and of course, your bling. Gold and silver. Forged in the heart of dying stars. Its properties have no equal. And that's why it will continue to be valuable, whether it's at 85 or 75 or 555. You will not be upset that you have it sitting around. Peace out, guys.